Hey, what's up, Spartan Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation Podcast here with your host, Matt Lonsberry, and my co-host, Aiden McCrone. Aiden, not the show we wanted to do today. Well, we wanted to do a show yesterday reacting to the game, but Aiden's under the weather a little bit here, but feeling a little bit better today. So we're going to try to crank out a show just to react to Michigan State's loss to North Carolina in the second round of the NCAA Tournament. And then we're also going to talk some hockey after the Spartans beat Michigan in the Big Ten Tournament Championship game. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it, Aiden. Michigan State gets off to a great start against the Tar Heels, firing on all cylinders early on both ends of the court, really. I was impressed. And then they endure that long scoring drought where they didn't put the ball in the basket for, it seemed like a 5-minute stretch there. North Carolina goes on the run to take the lead, and Michigan State never got the lead back after that. So kind of the game was a little bit of a microcosm of the season as a whole, just the inconsistencies that we've seen from Michigan State throughout the season. And that's what played out in the second round of the NCAA tournament, and that's what gets you eliminated in a one-and-done setting. So your thoughts on the game as a whole, Aiden, and your observations?
100%. It was definitely the epitome of the season, and just the start that they got off to, it made you think, okay, the consistency is, they're going to be consistent today. You have Walker hit some threes, Akins hit a three early on. So you're like, okay, the guys who you need to rely on are, making shots. So
right.
You feel confident within the first 10 minutes. I think Michigan State was up by 11 at one point.
Or 12.
Maybe even more. Yeah. So, you have that big lead, and then they just kind of cut into it and keep cutting into it. And then the scoring drought goes on for about 4 minutes. And I talked about this on Friday. I said, the key to beating North Carolina is not letting, their role players, letting RJ Davis and Baycott have everything and anything they want, but don't let Ryan and Ingram make shots. And that's exactly what they let them do. Is
right.
Harrison Ingram, had he had himself a historic day. Yeah, he made a lot of threes. And you can't, I see a lot of people on Twitter saying, Michigan State, every time they make the tournament, they play Marquise Noel who goes off, or Harrison Ingram has a really good day, or some kid plays who's a role player, has a career day. But they were making wide open shots. I don't know what they could do more than just MSU didn't guard them that well. I thought, all the shots that North Carolina made were wide open. They would double team Baycott, and then he would just kick out. And I thought Baycott, showed why he's one of the best players in college basketball. Every time they would double team him on offense, on defense, he just, he was just a man amongst boys in the paint. You think about just the first half alone. I think Hogard tried to drive into the lane about 3 or 4 times in the last 5 minutes or during that scoring drought, and he just blocked them every single time. It was just a stone wall down there. So, there was nothing special about this North Carolina team that, or not, I wouldn't say nothing special, but nothing that surprised me about North Carolina that, they did anything that, anyone who's watched them this year didn't know about. And, MSU played into their hands, and that ultimately cost them the game in the end.
For sure. To your point, I think that this is a good North Carolina team. They won the ACC regular season championship, but we've seen better Carolina teams than this one.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why Michigan State was only a 3.5 point underdog according to Vegas going into this game, and we saw that early on. Is that Michigan State could definitely hang with that Carolina team, but the same issues that again plagued this team through much of this season. The center position did not provide a whole lot. I thought Sissoko was probably the best of the centers yesterday. He had a couple turnaround jumpers. Most of his production came early though, I don't know how many minutes he played. I got it right here though. Sissoko played 14. Oh, he only played 8 minutes. That surprises me a little bit because I thought he was good early on in the game. But I'm not going to bang in the drum for more Monty Sissoko. I'm just saying, like, I thought of the bigs, he probably performed the best. And that's the centers I'm talking about. Like I think Xavier Booker did okay offensively, struggled a little bit on the defensive side of things. But the thing that really stood out to me was just once again the guard play not being quite up to snuff. Now Tyson Walker was very good. Akins had a nice little spurt there to start the second half to help Michigan State kind of close the gap from 9 to 2 in early going into the second half. But AJ Hoggard was really bad. There's no other way to put it. He was 1 for 10 from the field. He had multiple turnovers through the night, 3 turnovers, and just never really was able to get Michigan State into its offensive flow or rhythm during those tough stretches. And I think not to pin it on one guy because this is a total team loss for sure. You mentioned the defensive breakdowns. That's a team thing. But once again, like it was an unfortunate. If that's the last of AJ Hoggard in a green and white uniform, he's not going to be remembered well, I don't think, by the fan base, and that may be a little harsh, but that's how. That just speaks to the level of expectation there is for that position in this program. When you follow guys like Cassius Winston and Kalen Lucas and Drew Neitzel, we've had those discussions throughout the season. That's been set, and so it's unfortunate. We'll see what happens with Hoggard. He was non-committal as far as what his future holds. I think Izzo hinted at him probably moving on to whatever's next for him basketball-wise, but the door is not closed for a return for him or for Monty Sissoko, as you know they've got the COVID year. But really an unfortunate. Just a bad day to have a really bad game if you're AJ Hoggard. Unfortunately, Trey Holloman, I thought, struggled also. They went to him a little bit in the second half there when AJ was struggling, and Holloman didn't bring a whole lot else. And so a tough day for your point guards to have a rough night.
Yeah, and I think to your point about, Booker and Holloman, I think I was surprised about how many minutes those guys got. I think Booker got a lot more minutes than I expected. He played a lot in the second half. Kind of, I don't know if it was throwing in the towel per se or finding the right matchup or whatever it may be, but I was surprised by the amount of minutes he had. I thought he played well. But he did struggle. He did show kind of there's a lot to work on, but yeah, again with Hoggard, I think I think a large issue with this team is player development with the veteran players, and I think you see it a lot more in Hoggard than any of the rest of the guys, just because he is the point guard. There is a standard in this program for point guards. And so, it's just, maximized. And you see it more with him than anybody else. So, yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see if he, finds another college. If he, comes back for another year, I would be interested to see the fan reaction to that. Yeah. Or if he moves on to the pros. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's nothing. I mean, I feel like a broken record here, but there's nothing more that I can say about excuse me, this team that we haven't really said.
I know.
Not even within the last year, but within the last 3 years.
For sure. We have repeated ourselves a lot over this season, especially just because the expectations were so much higher this season than even going back multiple years. I would kind of got randomly sucked into some YouTube highlight stuff. And so I was watching some highlights from a couple of years ago, and I'm seeing the record like that team that the Michigan State team that barely got in. They got into the first 4 and they lost to UCLA. Just it was during that season, and just saw like the records, like wow, like it has been a rough stretch here for this program. We thought that was going to turn around this year, and they failed to live up to expectations. And there's two sides of expectations, because sometimes either a fan base or a media can have too high of an expectations for a team, and that's more so on them than the program itself. And that might be some of the case here as well. But at the same time, I distinctly remember going to press conferences and Izzo being asked about the expectations, and he did not shy away from those expectations. Before the season, early on in the season, he was asked about being a preseason top 4 team, and I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but a pretty close to a direct quote from Izzo. This is months ago. Was, yeah, we're back to where we're supposed to be. And so that's what he said. That's what the expectation was. And so I don't have a problem calling a spade, and the fact that they didn't live up to expectations this year. Now, that doesn't mean that this program is going to just fall off a cliff. I still think there's a lot of talent that's going to come back to this roster next year. But some adjustments need to be made, and that needs to include exploring the transfer portal to fill some holes in the roster. And then also, I think you mentioned player development. I think you got to take a look at your coaching staff and to evaluate, do we have the right guys in that room as well? And I'm not calling for any guys to be fired. I'm just saying you've got to evaluate it and see if this is the crew you want to go with going into next year, which is a pivotal year. We're 4 years into not living up to the standard of Michigan State men's basketball. So your thoughts on those type of different things?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to get your thoughts on Izzo's post game quote about, I'm gonna die trying to get back to, prominence, or another Final Four or another national championship. But yeah, I think it has to do a lot with development. I think Michigan State has lacked I mean, I think Joey Hauser was a good forward, but besides him and Hall, I think you have to go back to Xavier Tillman to think of a good front court player that MSU's had. And I think Hall really came along this season. I think starting in January, he really locked in, and outside of maybe 2 games was very consistent. And you go back to Hauser, and I think Hauser had a lot of issues with rebounding early on and defense, and he started to figure out kind of how to be better at those things. And he still struggled, but he came along as well. But the development of the front court post Dwayne Stevens' departure for Western Michigan has been kind of a struggle, and I don't know where that starts and ends. I mean, it could be based off of recruiting, it could be based off of coaching development, but yeah, there's a lot of different avenues that I think should be explored in the off season to figure out how to solve this problem, because it's been going on for 5 years now. So I mean, the easy answer is transfer portal. I think using the transfer portal, finding guys there, and we can talk about kind of what they need in the off season. But yeah, I think the Izzo post game comments about, I'm gonna die trying to get back to where we were before, is something that's he needs to prove, and really just the actions speak louder than the words.
I'm just gonna throw this out there. You're gonna have to excuse Aiden. He's going through like a cold right now, and so that's why he's struggling here. So give him some grace today. We were gonna do this show yesterday in a kind of an immediate reaction, and he texted me and he was like, "Hey, I'm sick, dude. Like, can we postpone this to tomorrow?" So he's powering through it today. So give him some grace as we continue on here. Yeah, no, I think you're right. The transfer portal is not a cure-all, but there has to be more of a willingness to look in there and again try to plug a hole here and there. There's a lot of big guys moving around this off season. You got Cliff Amourier, who's over at Rutgers, and I know he's visiting St. John's, and so there is he's a hot commodity and somebody who a lot of teams are going in on. You got Terrace Reed at Michigan. I don't know if he'd be willing to come over from Michigan to Michigan State, but like there are some guys out there who you can try to find some different makers at that 5 spot. And so going back to Izzo's quote about I'm going to do what I can to go further in this tournament or die trying. It's a strong statement. It needs to be backed up now with action. We can't, and I like the recruiting class that is coming in for Michigan State. And Xavier Booker came out. I think he was asked a question yesterday about his future, and he said he's for sure coming back to Michigan State. If that is the case and he can go through a whole year of strength and conditioning and development, I think the sky is the limit for him next year. And he will immediately just a second year in the program and all of that stuff. You can see that he's going to take some strides next year. You would expect that. Cohen Carr, I really like his athleticism. Obviously, he needs to get better on defense. I think that's really what held him down. Especially over the last month, maybe even month and a half, as his minutes really dwindled. I think he kind of got lost defensively. We saw that again at times, even in recent weeks. That's the next stage for him. Again, and if he could develop even just a mid-range jumper to help space the floor a little bit, because when he's in the game, you've really got to be strategic with which bigs you have in the game, because Cohen right now is not a floor spacer. I don't know that he'll ever be a true floor spacer, but if he can develop at least a little bit of a mid-range jumper, that's one more weapon in his arsenal. And then teams got to come out a little bit, and that's when he can use his athleticism to get around people and punish people at the rim. So again, I like the pieces that will be coming back. I think you've got to find those complementary pieces, and it has to be like 1 or 2 pieces out of the portal to really strengthen the roster and make a run again at the Big Ten championship. I think that's you're 1 or 2 pieces away from doing that. I like what they're going to have, but it's not, in my opinion, unless like Booker takes this huge step, which he's capable of. I don't know that the roster, the way it is now, is gonna be a contender for the Big Ten next year and a contender for a run. Very well could be. It's very fluid. And basketball is very. We've seen it again this year's tournament. Like it's a coin flip a lot of these games. So, but I think 1 or 2 pieces can really strengthen their chances for a deeper run next year.
Yeah, and I think the transfer pieces. I see a question from Carrie Ellis as. For Purdue, they I know Jim just kind of answered that question. So Lance Jones came over from, I think, SIU, if I remember. And then but the thing is with Purdue versus Wisconsin is Purdue has a superstar. They have Zach Edey. And what they wanted to do is build, complementary pieces around them. So they went and got Lance Jones, who is a complimentary piece, who can shoot, who's good from deep, good defender, can run the point if needed when Smith and Lawyer are off the floor. And then for Wisconsin's case is they had a very similar team to Michigan State, and they needed a scorer, and they went and got AJ Storr, and he exploded. I think. Similar to AJ Storr, I think Dalton Connect at Tennessee is another perfect example of, they have a lot of good role players similar to MSU, and they needed a star or, a veteran guy to step up and take that next step for them. So I think MSU, next year will be very telling. I think what they need, especially with Walker gone, is a player out of the portal that is a prolific scorer and can really light it up and take over the game, because I do think Akins is capable of that. I think we've seen from him within the last 2 years where he's not always demanding the ball. I think, he is a good enough scorer to say, hey, give it to me every possession for the last 3 minutes and let me go win this game. And I think he's capable of doing that, but we haven't seen it on a consistent basis from him, whatever that may be. And I think that that's something that they need this year, especially with Walker gone. And
Sure.
I think the two biggest things out of the portal that they really need are a long wing. I think that's the number one priority should be a wing who's 6'6", 6'7", because I think Akins, again, if he comes back, which I'm confident he will, he seems a little mismatched at times because he is only 6'3", and they have him playing a 3. So getting a guy who's long, 6'6", 6'7", 3-and-D guy, I think that's a key need. And then a center. I think a guy who's really going to rebound. I think Terrace Reed would be a really good fit. I know MSU recruited him out of high school, so I think those are two really key pieces. Is finding a big man that can really rebound and be physical in this league, because the Big Ten, Zach Edey might be gone next year, but there are still plenty of really good players in the front court that have oversized a lot of MSU's bigs.
Yeah, for sure. A couple questions here. Carrie Ellis mentioned, I think the loss of Fears was probably felt most in yesterday's game, just because AJ and Trey struggled so much. And so if you would have had a third option, and who knows how the rest of Jeremy's season would have gone had he not, suffered that gunshot wound or was shot over Christmas break. And again, it's an unfortunate situation. And so, yeah, I think that was he was playing. He was probably the freshman who was the most getting the most consistent minutes up to that point. And so, he probably would have developed into maybe a more important role. Does that win them the game? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I'd be willing to go that far. It probably helps. So that was significant. Like losing him was a big blow to this program or this team, because he'll be back, and looking forward to seeing him back on the floor. There was another question earlier. See if I can find it. It had to do with any thoughts from you on Jeremy Fears, Aiden, as I kind of look for this other question I wanted to get to. Oh, okay. Yeah, I found it.
Oh,
but go ahead.
All right. I mean, not really. I just kind of would mirror what you're saying. Is just, I don't know if he determines the game, but I do think he would be getting a lot of minutes at this point in time if he wasn't injured.
For sure. Junior asked, what's our expectations for North Carolina the remainder of the tournament, and if they go on to the Final Four, does that vindicate Sparty? Here's my thoughts on that. I'm going to start with the second part of your question, and my answer would be Michigan State is a program that doesn't seek vindication by the team that they lost to, what they go on to do. And I'm not attacking you personally, Junior. I appreciate your comment, but I'm just this program is proud enough that regardless of who they lose to, they have high expectations. And so I don't think it does. I don't think it vindicates the fact that this was a disappointing season. The fact that you had to play North Carolina in the second round speaks to the fact that you didn't live up to expectations. As far as Carolina, I mean, the tournament is so random, but I like that team. And I'll just speak to my own bracket that I filled out. I've got Arizona coming out of the region. I think that's the best team in the West region, in my opinion. Plus, they're going to have the advantage of if they get through. They won yesterday, so if they get through either Baylor or Clemson in the Sweet 16 and makes the Elite, that's my favorite to come out of it. Carolina could get there. Alabama could beat Carolina. Any of those three teams I could see coming out of this region. So, but that's kind of my thought though, is that, Michigan State's too proud of a program to point out, well, we lost to a team who made it to the Final Four. That's great, but like, you used to be the team going to the Final Four pretty consistently, and that hasn't happened recently. So that's just my thoughts on that. Anything to add, Aiden?
Yeah, I mean, MSU, I mean, I feel like since I can remember, North Carolina's always had MSU's number.
Yeah.
I mean, I think from what I remember, the only time Michigan State ever beat UNC was the PK80 a few years ago. And yeah, I mean, that's a team that they struggle against, and they're another blue blood. So when, that's another team that you measure yourself against out of conference, that you play quite a bit in, early season tournaments, or you see them, in March, that they've struggled against. And so I think, I don't think there's any vindication in that besides, historically they've really struggled.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm kind of jumping back a little bit here where we started talking about the future. You mentioned Malik Hall. I thought he played well in the second game. That was one of the things we talked about after the first round game against Mississippi State, is him needing him to step up and play better in the second round. I thought he did. In fact, like during that scoring drought, I would have, and Michigan State had a couple of scoring droughts. Malik was so good and was having his way with the matchup. I think Ingram was trying to guard him, could not stop him. Would have liked to seen Michigan State go to Malik more in those during those stretches where they couldn't get anything going offensively. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Malik because I thought he really played well towards the end of the season, and kind of, I don't want to say like erased a lot of the narrative surrounding him his first 4 years, but certainly ended his career on a high note, and we kind of saw him reach his full potential, which was cool for him just on a personal basis to see that. And he'll be a guy who's missed. He was a pretty reliable player down the stretch this season. Him and Tyson being gone, you need a couple of new alphas to step up. And one point I wanted to make, you were talking about Akins in his game. I think, and this could change by next year. And I don't know Jaden personally, so but I'm just, from my perspective or the way I've observed him, he seems like more of a number 2 scoring option. He seems to have more of that mentality. Whereas Tyson was purely you could tell that he was an alpha. Like when things got tight, Tyson was the guy. And maybe Jaden can step into that role next year and be more of that guy. But I just think his game is more of that. It's just that number 2 option. Like the defense is focused on one guy, and he's that outlet. And unfortunately, he didn't shoot the ball as well this year as he did the first 2 seasons in East Lansing. And so we'll see if he can kind of get that figured out going into next year. I don't believe he flirted with the NBA last year. I think that was more to just get an evaluation. His numbers took a step down this year as far as like percentages and things like that. And so I can't imagine he'll turn pro this year. I think he'll be back next year. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Akins, and if his mindset changes at all going in, and he'll be a senior. And to the point you made about, we talked about AJ Storr at Wisconsin or Lance Jones at Purdue, and how those guys fit different needs for those teams. Like Wisconsin needed an alpha to come in and kind of take them to the next level. And you can argue whether or not that was successful. They got knocked out in the first round of the tournament, but for a while there, they were competing with Purdue to lead the Big Ten. And so I think he had a good year. Lance Jones was more of a complementary piece. I do think Michigan State needs, I don't know if you've got to bring in like your next leading scorer or anything like that, because Booker, we expect a big thing, but like you need some pieces to it's not like an overhaul through the portal. You need 1 or 2 pieces, as we talked about anyway earlier, and I think you nailed it with the small forward and the center positions.
Yeah, I think I do think that Michigan State will use the portal this offseason. I think, Izzo, I do feel like those are a bit of empty words right now until we see some action about,
It's fair.
but I think using the portal would show that, hey, I'm serious about it. I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but I need to adapt to get to where I want to be again. And I think it took them a few years to do it. And I know from kind of previous, from what I've heard, it took them a lot to get Tyson Walker to even come to MSU and convince Izzo to even recruit him. So
Yeah.
The fact that maybe he is willing to adapt, I do think they will use the portal, but I think the question will be how much. I do think they will go get a guy, but are they going to get one guy or are they going to get two or three? And, is someone, at the expense of that's already on the team? I don't know. But I would assume maybe, unless, somebody else just decides to leave that we aren't thinking of. But yeah, it just, seeing that take action, the season's over. Definitely a lot of guys who are already entered the portal, plenty of more to come. But just seeing that, I think there are some guys that they've already reached out to. And with the season over, I think there's going to be a lot more, but just seeing what they can do, how many players can they bring in, are they assessing the proper needs, are really the three things to look at.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of a longer question here from Steve, or more of a statement, but he's wondering about the identity of Michigan State's program right now. As long as Izzo's there, the identity is going to be defend, rebound, and run. Like that's kind of like the mantra. Unfortunately, Michigan State hasn't been a very good rebounding team over the last 4 years because that kind of goes back to the front court play. Um, it does seem it's strange. Like Michigan State wants to get out on the fast break for sure, but they've been wildly inconsistent with that as well, as far as like how often. And maybe I don't know if that's an AJ thing, or if that's, I'm not sure what plays into that. But it does seem like either Michigan State's fast break was really good or non-existent, and there was very little in between for whatever reason. Um, Somebody in the comments also talked about, the best of college basketball, like the best teams, they've got 3 or 4 guys who can really score. I think that's evident. That's been lacking for this program in recent years as well. This year it was Malik and Tyson most nights, where you're kind of your 2 guys, and I think Michigan State expected to get more out of Akins consistently as like a number 3 scorer. Just didn't play out that way in the majority of games. He had his moments, but to somebody's point again in the comments, was when he had his moments, it seemed like somebody else was a little worse. And so, like, yeah, you've got to have more scoring options in order to avoid those lulls. So that's what I think the identity is, but the personnel has not matched that, or gotten. You know what I'm trying to say is they haven't had the pieces in order to fit that identity. I think that's what Steve is observing here. Aaron asks about how come Purdue gets a great big man all the time. You go back to Haas. I can't remember his first name, but Haas was before Edey. Isaac Haas was before Edey. Before Haas, they had another big tall
AJ Hammonds.
Yeah, exactly. So they do have those guys. I think when you have a string of success at a particular spot, that's appealing to those 7'2" or 4" behemoths. Hey, I'm going to go to Purdue. Like they've got a proven track record of so that's part of that for sure. It remains to be
same reason for MSU's point guards. I feel
for sure. Yeah. I mean, Jeremy Fears is another example. He was a 5-star kid. Like, let's not forget that he was a highly coveted kid. And so again, that speaks to the pieces that Michigan State has. So it's the same thing. I think in Purdue's case, though, we got to see their game is probably on right now.
Yeah.
So we'll see if they can figure some things out and actually make it out of the first weekend of the tournament. How they doing, Aiden? You got it on there in the background?
They're losing by 2.
Okay, so we'll
early,
see if
it's
they
still
can get
early on.
Yeah, like Matt Painter has a formula to win the Big Ten. It's been very successful these last few years, but the tournament formula not so much. So we'll see if they can buck that trend. So yeah, there's pros and cons to that, but I think that's why Purdue has continued to find these guys, is because you start stacking success upon itself, and that recruits itself in a lot of ways. So just a couple again questions from the comment section there. Anything else in here, Aiden, that you're seeing in the comments? Or
I think we have the Dusty May to Michigan.
I did have that one. I started that one. You go ahead and give your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting hire for sure. I think on the surface level, it seems like a good hire that, a lot of schools have gone after him. And then I kind of have started reading a little bit more into it. He hasn't won his league. He did, and they did win their tournament last season and then, obviously went to the Final Four, but hasn't won the league. First round exit this year. Kind of got some spurts of success, but we'll see. I mean, obviously, it's kind of early in his in head coaching right now, and I know Indiana. He's an Indiana guy, so maybe going back to the Midwest could be successful. I think the jury's not out on him yet for who he is as a coach. I think he's got a lot of time, and I think Michigan is invested in basketball. You've seen the success that they've had, in the 2010s. So seeing what they could, continue to do, and then complement that with football. So, they got 2 new head coaches and they're 2 big revenue sports. So, it'll be interesting. And I guess we'll see, but I don't think it's, it shouldn't change anything for Michigan State. Comparatively, I think this should still be a rivalry that Michigan State should, dominate and win, especially if a guy's in his first year at Michigan. And I think there's going to be a lot more roster turnover to come with that as well. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, no, Dusty May's got a ton of work to do at Michigan. Like that roster,
years, like multiple years.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Like with the transfer portal, you can plug holes typically, but it's hard to overhaul your. I mean, Michigan tried to do that under Juwan this last year. You brought in Kamwa and Burnett from Alabama and Trey Jackson from Seton Hall. Like they brought in a ton of guys, and it would completely fell flat. They had some talented pieces there in Ann Arbor. When you think about Doug McDaniel, Terrace Reed, Kamwa while he was healthy, but it didn't come together at all. And I think that was reflective of the coaching for sure. But also just how hard it is to build chemistry with a bunch of transfer portal guys. So it's going to take some time. And I question a little bit, we'll see, but I question a little bit Michigan's investment in basketball right now. Obviously football is king. It's always going to be king over there. And that was evident with how they've approached NIL, I think, for sure. And so we'll see what happens with that. As far as just Dusty May as a coach, though, I think I agree with you. The book hasn't been written on him yet. He did a good job at Florida Atlantic, which is a place that hasn't had a whole lot of success before he got there, a whole lot of history. They did. I give them credit for last year's run to the Final Four, but they did catch some breaks too. That Memphis game was kind of down to the wire. Fairleigh Dickinson upsets Purdue in the second or the first round, and so you get them as opposed to Purdue in the second round. But I was there in New York. That's the bracket that Michigan State was in last year, and so I saw Florida Atlantic beat Tennessee, which was they were a good team last year. And I watched them. I stayed in New York and I watched them beat Kansas State as well. And so like those were good teams. They did not live up to the kind of the preseason expectations. Another team that didn't live up to the preseason expectations this year. I think they were top 10 coming into the year, and they got in as an 8 seed and they lost to Northwestern, which Michigan State knows all about Boo Boo and those guys. So so I think he's a good coach. Is he a guy who's going to move the needle and help Michigan get back to the top of the Big Ten? The jury is still very much out on that. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I wanted to address that.
I think I'd see Steve's comment about MSU stop the incestuous. We only hire our own grads. I think, I think Alan Haller, he is a Michigan State guy. I think he played football at MSU. He's a grad, obviously, athletic director. And I think he sees that. I think, he's made a lot of outside box hires, but he's also found the right people within, the Michigan State family, and just finding those qualified people like, Adam Nightingale. And then
who is a Michigan State grad, by
the way. And then so it's finding that kind of happy medium where yes, you want to probably interview some people in the family, but also make some outside interviews like a Jonathan Smith where, and then you can weigh your options. And I know Robin Freilich has had some MSU ties, but, she went out and had success elsewhere. And I think, a lot of people, I think Drew Valentine's a good example of that as well, of another person who I know a lot of people are saying, maybe he's the heir to Izzo.
Guy, yeah.
So, he's a guy that, played at Oakland. Obviously, his brother played here, was a grad assistant at MSU, then went elsewhere, went back to Oakland to coach, went to Loyola Chicago, building that coaching tree. Robin Freilich, Adam Nightingale, both other good examples of, Nightingale, when coached for Team USA, built that coaching tree, expanded broader. And then finally, when he was ready to come back, and became a qualified candidate, then he came back, and then, now they're successful. So I think we talk about player development on this team. I think, coaching development is the same way. You hear you can't buy experience a lot in, any field of work. And I think that's important, here too, especially, Jonathan Smith having head coaching experience, for more than 5 years, Robin Freilich having experience, at Bowling Green, and, having success at the smaller programs and learning to develop. So I think that's really important. And like I've said before, I think I trust Alan Haller enough to make the right moves.
Yeah, I think when you were going into coaching searches, there's a balance. Like, you don't want to just focus on people who have Michigan State ties, because you're hamstringing yourself if you do that.
Right.
You've got to branch out and seek who's best for the job. But sometimes the best person for the job is somebody who has Michigan State ties or ties to your university. I think Adam Nightingale is a perfect example of that. Yeah, he's a Michigan State guy, played here, graduated from here, and has done an excellent, outstanding job. We haven't talked as much hockey today as we anticipated, but they just won the Big Ten regular season championship, first conference title since I think 2002. And then they win the Big Ten tournament, 4 straight wins over Michigan. So like, he's checking every box. And then you look at it now, Robin Freilich has done a good job with the women's program. I was going to bring up Jonathan Smith. Like, again, you talked about Dusty May, a little bit different situation, but some simulators. They were both at their previous schools for 6 years.
Right.
Jonathan Smith at his alma mater. So he's got to come here and prove it that he can win in the Midwest and he can win in the Big Ten. But it's a hire that I like. So we'll see. We'll get our first glimpse of that this fall. Another job that I think it's going to take some time, I think, for Michigan State football. I look at this schedule and I do think you can get back to bowl eligibility with this schedule. I like some of the roster pieces that are in East Lansing for that program, but you've got a lot of holes to fill as well. Like there's plenty of spots that need to be upgraded, and so I've been trying to implore the Michigan State's fan base to give Jonathan Smith some time, because I don't know what we're going to see this fall. I expect the organizational side of things, I expect to be better. Well, frankly, it can't get a whole lot worse if we're being honest. So I expect that to be like more buttoned up and better. But as far as talent level, I think there's still a gap between where Michigan State's at right now and some of the better programs in the Big Ten. So we weren't going to talk about football today, but there's a little taste of football, and we'll get more into that in the weeks to come with spring practice underway. I've seen. Again, we talked about this earlier. I think Michigan State does need to evaluate its coaching staff, or Izzo needs to evaluate his coaching staff. Remind me of Fife's first name. I can't off the top of my head.
Yeah, Dane Fife. Fife. I think he's calling. If I remember, I think he called a few games for MSU this year on Big Ten Network.
Really?
Yeah, and yeah, he was out at IU. I think it was after 1 year that he was hired by Mike Woodson, and yeah, they just didn't really see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. I think Mike Woodson, I don't think he's had any college experience at all, so he has a different, maybe a more MBA professional business level approach, and Fife has a very different approach from that, coaching in college his whole time. So. Yeah, so I think he's been on Big Ten Network this year a few times. So, yeah, that's pretty much what he's doing.
Yeah, I think it was maybe Junior or somebody else asked about Tom Crean. It doesn't seem like too many basketball head coaches are rejoin staffs. It doesn't seem that way. Like not so much in football, you see that quite a bit actually, where a coordinator might take a head coach job. He's there for 3 years. It doesn't really work out. He gets fired, and then he's back on somebody's staff. That doesn't seem to happen as much in basketball for whatever reason. Probably part of it is, basketball staffs are smaller than football staffs. And Tom Crean, he's working for one of the TV networks right now too.
Yeah, he's on ESPN. Yeah,
he's on ESPN. He's probably making pretty good dough. Not coaching dough, but like pretty good money to not have to go through the recruiting, not have to go through the game prep and all of that stuff. And so, but I do think Tom is a guy. Oh, Crean is a guy who Izzo can call and then get some thoughts from and things like that. And we'll see. Like this, the season just ended yesterday, and so we've got to give Izzo time to really evaluate and find out kind of what went wrong here, and we'll see the adjustments that he makes this offseason, and that'll be telling. It'll be telling. Like you're not gonna hide from our observations this offseason, because the spotlight is very much on the program after a disappointing year, and so we'll see what happens with that. If you guys got any more questions in the comment section, go ahead and throw those at us. We're going to try to wind it down here. I promised Aiden that we'd do a shorter show with him recovering here. So
that's fine.
If you've got any other questions, go ahead and throw those in the comments. I'll talk about hockey a little bit here. Full disclosure, I watched the end of the hockey game. Mostly just the overtime period. I was watching mostly basketball. That's just an honest assessment for me, but I did watch the overtime period. It was cool to see Munn Arena just on fire, and just the excitement and all of that. It does sound like I think Michigan State had locked up a number 1 seed even before the championship game yesterday. But they've got a good path now in the NCAA tournament. They're seeking their first Frozen Four since probably the late 2000s, before the 2010s. I could be wrong about that, but I think that was the last time they were in Frozen Four. Won a national championship, I think, in the 2000s.
06, yeah.
06, yeah. There you go. So, this team has been really good all year. The Big Ten is a tough league when you got, Minnesota's always good. Michigan's typically pretty solid. Notre Dame's typically quite good. So they're battle tested. There's always these smaller. It's hockey's weird, man. There's always these smaller schools that have really good hockey programs. I think about Boston University or Denver is a program that is really good. And so and hockey's so unpredictable. You don't know what kind of run the team's going to make, but it does seem like this team has the pieces. And Trey Augustine has been really good in goal. And so they've got pieces to make a run again in the NCAA tournament. We'll definitely be paying more attention to hockey now that basketball is finished. And so might react to that a little bit more going forward. I don't see any other questions here, Aiden. So let's kind of give our final thoughts here on any of this: hockey, basketball. Any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think basketball, again, it's got to be a work in progress. I think the assistant coaching, I think there does need to be some sort of change, whether it is, whether it's the roles of the assistant coaches or kind of who the assistant coaches are. But I think, again, there's a fine line between, keeping it in the family and making it outside the box hire. And I think, Doug Wojcik, Montgomery are both guys who have coached for, who coached for Izzo long ago, then when became head coaches, didn't really have a ton of success and came back. And then you have, a younger guy with Thomas Kelly, who I think is, a rising star in the industry. So I think, you have a lot to work with, but figuring out who's really works best in what role, I think finding a guy who can really help develop the front court is huge. And I don't know the specific roles of each one of those guys in practice, but it's very apparent that the development has, gone down since, Mike Garland and Dwayne Stevens have left. So figuring that out, and, I think outside the box hire for an assistant would really benefit them, on top of the amount of guys that they already have there.
Yeah. And I think my final thought kind of is this too. I'm wondering if Izzo can still instill some of that Michigan State grit and determination back into this program, because that seems to has been lacking as well. Izzo talks about this being a different age of different young people these days. I sound like an old man saying that, but like I'm 31, and so like I'm kind of in that transition now between like I'm not a kid anymore, but like I don't see myself as this like prestigious adult either. So I'm somewhere in the middle there, but like I kind of get what he's saying. With it is a different environment now. Kids are recruited at freaking 12, 13 years old. They're playing AAU ball. You've got a bunch of people telling them during a lot of their development years how good they are. You've got people talking in their ear, trying to be agents. Like that's a whole new thing. And so there's other things to work with. Social media is not new, but like players do catch flack on social media that's fairly new when you consider about like the history of college athletics. Some of the things that these athletes have to deal with. The solution to that is stay off social media. But I'm just some of the things that Izzo has brought up though.
Right.
So can he instill some of that toughness back in? I think that's got to be a player-led thing though. Like that's what Cassius did
100%,
really well.
Yeah.
That's what Kalen Lucas did really well. It was those guys who led the charge with that. So I think that's what's been lacking. I think Jeremy Fears has that mindset or has that makeup. I think he could be that kind of guy, especially as he goes into his second year, and this kind of becomes his program. We'll see what happens with AJ and Madi and those guys. But if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I think AJ might move on this offseason to whatever's next. I could be wrong about that. And maybe he wants a chance to redeem that. I mean, if that's his last game, it's really a sour note for him to end his career on. So we'll see what happens with that. With that, Aiden, I think we'll kind of close it down. Going forward, obviously our coverage is going to shift a little bit. Michigan State football is in the midst of spring practice. We'll give some attention to that for sure. We will again keep a closer eye on hockey now as some more time has opened up with the end of basketball season. So that's kind of where our coverage will be going forward. We'll try to continue to do a show once a week, but that will kind of be a little hit or miss depending on the content. Recruiting should be getting going here before too long with football. So there's stuff out there to talk about, and we'll do our best to continue to cover that. Thank you guys as always for joining us, and we'll see you next time.